Hello. Good morning. Where's your daughter? Your daughter? Not here. So his name, I easily remember because Wolf Singer. So today, I consider, besides Wolf Singer, I'm Fox Singer. Okay. Thank you. Mongolian? Right. Sambano. Thank you. Yes. I already mentioned his late father, not only my friend, but I consider my teacher about quantum physics. Then usually I tell him, I'm a student of your late father about quantum physics, but actually hopeless student, because when I listen your father's explanation about quantum physics, and I'm listening, seems I understand something. After this session, nothing left here. So, hopeless. Please, look.
Good morning, everybody. Translation is available, so if everyone needs it, you get it outside. I was kindly asked by the Tibet House to introduce you to this program today and guide you through the day and the symposium, which is an interdisciplinary meeting and exchange of thoughts of scientists, but also of practitioners in various fields. The purpose of coming together, however, reaches far beyond information. As active human beings, we act. We manage and achieve great things, yet as a species among others on this planet, we are also quite unfair, greedy, and sometimes extremely violent. In short, most of the time, we do not behave wisely. Could we change that at least a little bit? Today we hope to offer a perspective which is not just based on goodwill and positive thinking, but also on scientific research and training. The Tibet House, Germany in Frankfurt, is one of only 3 official Tibet houses of this kind worldwide, apart from New York and the Tibet House Cultural Center in New Delhi. The Tibet House in Frankfurt is under the direct patronage and spiritual guidance of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and it's designed to promote dialogue between science and wisdom, between Tibetan Buddhism and the very secular world in which we live. It is designed to improve what His Holiness calls secular ethics and meditation. So today's symposium will have 3 parts. This morning, we focused on theoretical framework. That is, on what we know about secular ethics and secular meditation and the effects it has on everyday life. After the lunch break, part 2, we will go deeper into practical projects and see what we discussed, some of the theoretical insights applied in practice. The afternoon, thus, is a bridge between science and life. After a break, the third part of the symposium, you will see a documentary film which summarizes what we have discussed. And after the film, the participants of all the meetings in the morning and in the afternoon sessions will be here, and you can ask questions. We do that in a written form because it's easier. I will explain that later on. And then, in difference to the program there is an additional item on the agenda. His Holiness asked to give a brief introduction to this point, which he already mentioned. 30 years ago, an event like this would not have been possible. Serious researchers meeting with contemplative practitioners and think about the improvement of lives. There were two important steps which enabled that development. One was the introduction of mindfulness-based stress reduction as a method in the late 70s. And then there was also another global step, the decision and the will of His Holiness to open his cultural, religious, and spiritual heritage to scientific discourse. He wanted it to be tested and analyzed. Without him and all the scientists he asked along the way to cooperate, meditation research based on scientific methods would not have been possible. His Holiness asked me to remind you all today that his friend, the German physicist, philosopher, and later promoter of peace studies, Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, died 10 years ago in April 2007. Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker worked with Werner Heisenberg, made important theoretical discoveries, greatly influenced the theory of planetary formation in the early solar system. After the Second World War, Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker became founding director of the Department of Theoretical Physics at the Max Planck Institute for Physics in Göttingen. Even though there is still a debate sometimes on his involvement in plans of the Nazi regime to build a nuclear bomb, it's clear that in his later career, he focused on philosophical topics and especially on ethical issues. He became professor of philosophy at the University of Hamburg with a special interest in global ethics. With the Indian philosopher Pandit Krishna, he established a research foundation for Western science and Eastern wisdom. And he was a member of the Göttinger 18, which was a group of prominent German physicists who severely protested against the idea that the German army, the Bundeswehr, should be equipped with tactical nuclear weapons. It was the will of His Holiness today to first speak shortly, 5 minutes, about his friends, and after that, Ulrich von Weizsäcker, the son of Karl Friedrich, who was invited by His Holiness, will also talk to you. Ulrich von Weizsäcker, just briefly, is a physicist, professor of biology, was director at the United Nations Center for Science and Technology in New York, and is co-president of the Club of Rome. And now please welcome His Holiness again.
Indeed, I feel great honor sitting with great world visitors, son. The son also now get quite old. So, my great friend, old singer. So sitting together, I really feel great honor and deeply feeling some kind of reunion. Long time friend. But he knew, but because of his father, I have great admiration. And then, now the question is, today's world, lot of progress in material field and economy and some other field. But I think today's world, I think some kind of mental crisis. also, mental level, there is too much unrest like that. So the physical action was killing, bullying, and neglected thousands of people, particularly children, women, dying. So then big question whether we can do something or not. Then I think, I believe, according to my friend, yes, basic human nature, as I mentioned yesterday, basic human nature is more compassionate. And now, the scientist, is a special brain science specialist, they begin to feel the mental consciousness is something important to do in order to keep peace of mind, and through that way, better health. So I developed genuine interest about modern science, and then the quantum physics was something very wonderful. One time, one Indian nuclear physicist, he told me, in the West, quantum physics is something new idea, new concept. But in India, 2000 years ago, already developed that concept. So I have interest to comparison like that. So then, late David Bohm and von Weizsäcker, I consider my tutor about quantum physics. So, and then, besides that particular subject, say, late your father, say, we have sort of dogs. And very useful. So therefore, when we have this kind of meeting, I felt some more visitors, children or something, if participate and because of the memory way. Now, I feel then great honor. So now, Mrs. is here and you are here. So as I mentioned earlier, now you also now become old. So we everybody year by year get older and older. That's the sign of moving of time. If time not move, then no further development, further progress. Actually, very basis of change is time. So, according to that reality, we have the opportunity to explore our intelligence in some way, with long, far-sighted and holistic. So this kind of meeting, I feel important. Thank you.
Your Holiness, dignitaries, friends, it's a great honor for me to address you with just a few words. I know that my father would have been extremely happy seeing you conversing with good scientists around the world, in particular here in Germany. In family, he was a wonderful father. He accepted all our whims, which was fantastic. But in addition, he also brought close to us that there is a common interest between deep religion and the sciences, not only in dialogue, that's a good thing, but in addition to jointly search for the truth. He knew that peace among nations, among people, is virtually impossible without good religion. He knew that prosperity and progress was not conceivable without good science. Science that is not bribed, not, based on lies. You know, today everybody is talking about fake news and all that, which is a bad sign. We need the correctness, the proofs, the scientific proofs, but also we need the deep knowledge coming perhaps in meditation, in the tradition 2,000 years old, that does exist and is part of human culture and wisdom. In the Club of Rome, we are currently working on, as we perceive it, the need for a new enlightenment. The old enlightenment was great, with Immanuel Kant's idea of eternal peace, with the idea that not the king but the people are the sovereign, and many other great innovations, but it has been transmogrified into utilitarianism, which is not good enough. A new enlightenment has to acknowledge balance between short-termism. If I want to drink now and not in 30 years from now, and long-term, meaning the future of humankind, of nature. We have to acknowledge the balance between the state and the market. The state gives the law, the market has to obey. But today, markets are global and the state is national, so markets are dominating the state, which is not good. We have to have a balance between religion and the public. If we have a state that is dominated by a religion, like the Islamic State or so, it can be a disaster. But if we have a state without the wisdom of religion, it can also be a disaster. So balance, which is a virtue, a great achievement in Buddhism and other, mostly Asian religions, is going to be the essential part of a new kind of enlightenment. We are extremely humbled by your presence. We are extremely proud of your way of thinking, of your acknowledging great minds like Werner Heisenberg, David Bohm, my father, Karl Friedrich von Weizsäcker. But now the turn is over to you again. I feel extremely grateful, Your Holiness, for inviting me.
Well, for more than 2,500 years, it is claimed that meditation and mindfulness do have a lot of positive effects on body and mind. But only in recent times, science was actually able to really study and measure these effects. Today we have a lot of empirical data about the changes taking place in our body, in our immune system, the stress and hormone system, and of course, the change in the brain. But there's also something else and something more. Wolf Singer is one of the leading neuroscientists worldwide. His scientific work as a director of the Max Planck Institute for Brain Research in Frankfurt. Then he was founding director of the Ernst Sprungmann Institute for Neuroscience and the Frankfurt Institute for Advanced Studies. In his research he focused on the neural substance of higher cognitive functions, such as thinking, for example. What is it that enables us to have a coherent perception and perform coherent actions? Beside these studies in foundational research of the brain, he also started to become interested in meditation research. With his friend, the Tibetan monk Mathieu Ricard, who's also a scientist, they recently wrote the book Beyond the Self, Conversations Between Buddhism and Neuroscience. Please welcome Wolf Singer. Wolf, you have the gadget?
I have.
You have the laser pointer for the presentation?
I have no slides.
Okay.
No science today.
I thought you did.
Your Holiness, meine Damen und Herren, it is really a great honor and pleasure to have you here again and to share my introductory remarks with you, to hear your comments afterwards and your critical your criticism, which I know can sometimes be quite harsh. So our discussions today, they will be centered on issues of education and secular ethics, an ethics that is not anchored in transcendental belief systems. And we are very much looking forward to your opinions on the issues that will be presented throughout this morning. Now, my personal opinion is that one of the central problems, if not the central problem of our civilizations, is our evolutionary heritage. We are, as we have learned over the years, the product of an evolutionary process that optimized us to survive, to reproduce, and to protect our offspring. This was the main goal. And this competitive selection has endowed us with large and diverse repertoires of behavioral dispositions, drives, and cognitive abilities. We developed a host of pro-social abilities such as love, affection, trust, empathy, fairness, and altruism towards our mating partners, our offspring, and the cooperating members of our families and tribes. But we also developed strong drives to explore the world and to use our intelligence and to predict, in order to predict dangerous events and to improve our living conditions. In addition, we developed drives that we came to consider as harmful nowadays, although they were equally important to assure survival, in particular when we have to compete for sparse resources or get aggressed by competitors. In all these cases, we tend to become exceedingly egoistic, selfish, greedy, unfair, and aggressive. And we switch from caring kindness to counterattack, hatred, and revenge. And we then use our intelligence to harm competitors and rivals. However, thanks to our intelligence and creativity, we also excel over animals in both the positive and the negative manifestations of these inborn behavioral traits. We can be altruistic to the limits of self-sacrifice, which no animal does. But we can also be extremely cruel. We do, of course, observe considerable inter-individual variations in these traits, and probably also some gender-related differences. We are not sure yet. But we all possess this broad repertoire of deeply rooted traits. We all can be good and bad at the same time. Now, evolution has also endowed us with exceptional cognitive abilities that allowed us, in contrast to animals, to initiate what we call cultural evolution. We developed a sophisticated communication system, our language, that enables us to engage in reflexive dialogues of the form, I know that you know what I know, or I know that you know how I feel. And such dialogues allowed us to learn about the mental states of the respective other, and to gradually become aware of the fact that the world consists also of an immaterial dimension that can be experienced, named, and shared, and not only of material objects. So we added an immaterial, a mental, a spiritual dimension to our existence. Examples of these novel realities are our religious belief systems, our ideologies, our convictions, our moral norms, our ethical judgments, but also the concepts of freedom and equality and our narratives of history. Our unique ability to share observations, thoughts, and concepts allowed us to form very complex and highly cohesive societal structures. But at the same time, it also enabled us to develop mental constructs of racial, religious, and national identities. And these constructs added a very consequential dimension to our distinctions of friends and enemies. So, on the one hand, these cultural achievements have substantially amplified our pro-social behavior. We have implemented rules of conduct and codified them as commandments in religious belief systems, and we assured obedience to these rules by promising reward and punishment not only during lifetime but beyond our physical existence. Pro-social behavior was also encouraged by social recognition that attributes high moral value to pro-social behavior and by secular normative systems that again rely on reward and punishment to reinforce compliance. On the other hand, cultural constructs have also been used to dramatically amplify behavioral dispositions that we came to consider as negative. The history of mankind is rich in examples demonstrating that the most cruel and collectively committed aggressions, homicide, genocide, deprivation of freedom, denial of human dignity, have actually been committed and justified in the name of cultural constructs such as religions, belief systems, ideologies, concepts of national and ethnic identity, and many more. Doctrines propagated by belief systems, propaganda, social recognition, and biased education have always played crucial roles in motivating and justifying aggression, wars, homicide, and suppression. Thus, and I found this an interesting issue, cultural techniques per se are ambivalent. They can be applied to enhance the expression of pro-social behavior, but they can also be abused to dramatically amplify the expression of our dark side. Because many of the most cruel regimes in our history were actually installed and sustained by highly cultivated and educated people. Our own German history, I think, is a blatant example for this. Hence, neither religions, education, nor culture seem to be able to protect us from engaging in extremely negative actions. The reason is that mental constructs can be instrumentalized and abused to justify aggression and cruelty. So now this raises the question which options we actually are left with. And the contributions of our dialogue today will probably address some of these ideas. I personally believe there is no singular nor any simple solution to the problem. Rather, we will have to consider a whole bunch of measures, none of which is actually new. As mentioned in the beginning, one of the major factors for the amplification of our negative behavioral dispositions is the context in which we evolve. Scarcity of resources, inequality, injustice, humiliation, and lacking of self-esteem nurture greediness and aggression and negative behavior, hatred. Thus, we obviously need to continue to strive for political, social, and economical systems that reduce these factors. We have also seen that belief systems, cultural constructs that are not based on empirically validated facts, are particularly well suited to be abused as justifications of aggression. Here, in my opinion, the by far most effective antidote and therefore Weizsäcker has already addressed it, is the critical and rational analysis of our conditions. And you have repeated this many, many times. And our cultures have actually invented very efficient tools to attain this goal. Our Occidental cultures have developed a technique of scientific reasoning and empiricism to obtain valid information about the world around us. And once we begin to make ourselves the object of scientific investigation, also of our own condition. Now, Eastern cultures that you represent probably in the most optimal way, they concentrated on contemplative practices that use analytical introspection to explore and analyze our inner reality. You, Your Holiness, addressed these practices, if I remember correctly, as the science of the mind. Both strategies effectively protect one against becoming seduced by false beliefs. Thus, relying on critical reasoning, insight, and empirically validated facts, and I emphasize empirically, rather than unproved beliefs, is, I think, by far the best strategy to avoid maladaptive behavior. And as it turns out, there is a surprisingly good convergence between the commandments condensed in the wisdom of world religions and the rules of conduct derived from rational insight that are codified in the secular ethics of advanced civilizations. They resemble each other quite substantially, but the match is not perfect. It is also evident that some convictions nurtured by religious systems and public opinion are in harsh contrast with empirical validated facts. So, the scientific approach propagated by humanistic enlightenment has undoubtedly proven beneficial for coping with the challenges of life, but it comes with a cost. It reduced our confidence in transcendental forces that we believe take care of us. Furthermore, it forced upon us the insight, and I think it's a tragic insight, that we are fully responsible for our destiny. And at the same time, because we discovered the complexity of the world and our restricted cognitive abilities, we became aware that we cannot predict the consequences of our actions and that we cannot predict our future. Now, this is an humbling insight, and this is a powerful source of insecurity. And obviously then a strong motivation to again search for consolation in belief systems. And nowadays, you mentioned it, we have a clearly visible and dangerous trend in our postmodern epoch to search consolation again in the world of unproved facts and beliefs and pseudo-religion. Yeah. So again the question is, Holiness, which are the options that we are left with? How can we cope with the challenges imposed on us by the program of enlightened humanism? How can we acquire the confidence required for assuming the self-imposed responsibilities, because it's ourselves who put these responsibilities on ourselves? And how can we endure the fallacies of life, the difficulties, without consolation, by projected beliefs, without relying on promises that will be fulfilled only beyond our earthly existence? I believe that these premises call for a coordinated, multi-level approach. Surely, we need to invest all our intelligence and creativity to design political, social, and economical systems whose architecture favors stability through self-organization and assures a maximum of equality, justice, and security. But this is a collective action that we have to take. Then we all need to realize that it is us who are responsible for the future of our life and our planet, and not somebody else. Now this insight, I think, that brings us to today's topic, requires a basic understanding of the laws of nature, the history of our universe, our evolutionary origins and heritage, our cognitive and psychological conditions and restrictions, the knowledge about the diversity of cultural traditions, and an understanding of the laws that govern the dynamics of complex systems. Now this is a very elitarian educational program. But I think on the long run, we shall only be able to cope with our problems if this awareness becomes a global awareness. Otherwise it won't work. So massive investment, I think, is also required to render humans competent in mastering cultural practices, techniques that allow for differentiated communication at both the rational but also the emotional level. This implies to master at least one differentiated language and to acquire basic competences in the non-rational communication techniques that are better suited to convey emotional contents, such as the products of art, music, corporal expression, and any sorts of artistic competence. However, all these techniques and the knowledge about the world will only be fully exploitable if we have the chance to become aware of ourselves. If we learn to master techniques that allow us a profound self-exploration. And this domain, I think, is the one that contemplative practices and training of mindfulness can exploit for us. The science of the mind, as you call it. It's a necessary and complementary basis of all the stuff that I have been talking about before. And I will soon come to an end. Bear with me for another 2 minutes or so. Because there might be another option, which is perhaps the most efficient one. And that might be to directly influence or shape the character of human persons by education in order to enhance pro-social behavior. Obviously, it would be very beneficial if our inherited drives, the drive for aggression, for greediness, and so forth, could really be changed rather than just be controlled by reward and punishment, what we mostly do. This would allow us to eradicate, perhaps, attitudes that may no longer be adapted to the actual conditions of our societies. Now, modifying a person's character is obviously much, much harder and more ambitious than teaching instrumental abilities, because it requires interference with the genetically determined architecture of our brains. Now, I think we by and large ignore whether these inborn dispositions can at all be modified. This is unclear. And if so, to which extent? But if there is a chance to modify these inborn traits, it is through education, it is through interventions that target the developing process of the brain itself, rather than a post hoc correction. And the reason is that these early interventions can interfere with the development of the brain, its architecture, its wiring, and thereby perhaps directly modify the programs according to which brains organize their perceptions and actions. Now, a brief remark on the development of the human brain. The human brain matures very, very slowly and reaches its adult structure only around the age of 20 years or 25. During this protracted developmental period, very large number of neuronal connections are formed, but also destroyed at the same time. And this process of making and breaking is controlled by neuronal activity. And this neuronal activity, in turn, is controlled by environment, by experience, by education. It serves to adapt the baby to the conditions into which it is born. So genetic factors and these environmental factors have the same effect on the brain. They determine the architecture, the wiring. And if we were able to modify these properties, we would actually be able to change the programming of the brain very early, to the same extent as is possible with genes. Unfortunately, we have no safe knowledge about the abilities, the options of this procedure. We don't know how much education can influence these behavioral traits. We don't know at which time of development we have to interfere in order to change particular properties. All this is unknown, and therefore much more research is needed before we can reach safe conclusions on educational strategies that enhance the likelihood of enhancing prosocial behavior. All we know is that both achievements and early experience determine the connectivity of the brain and thereby its cognitive and executive functions. Now, last chapter, last minute. We have throughout the last millennia of cultural evolution experimented with educational strategies, and the goals were probably always the same. To transmit knowledge, to teach survival techniques, to encourage prosocial behavior, and to repress harmful drives. It would be interesting to know, and maybe today we will find out something about it, whether we have already exhausted the repertoire of techniques to influence the character of people and of our children, or whether there are new strategies to be discovered. Another pressing question is at which developmental stage particular functions develop and can be manipulated or modified, if possible at all. Now these are empirical questions that can only be answered by rigorous scientific investigation. Now unfortunately, we have only very few well-controlled investigations of these questions. The field of education, therefore, is rich of dogmas, unproven convictions, and therefore is very susceptible to abuse, and we have many historical examples for this, in the service of belief systems and ideologies. Thus, pedagogical concepts must be met with the same skepticism and be subject to the same scrutiny as any other of our interventions. Because mistaken manipulations of brain development can cause irreversible damage, with all likelihood, we have to proceed with particular caution when experimenting with educational programs. And as always, when we lack empirical evidence, the best strategy, if we have to act, is to make only small and incremental changes and to very carefully examine the consequences with scientific rigor. And I hope that we will see today in which direction this field is moving, and I'm very curious to hear what the experts have to say about the options of education that they think could make us better people. Thank you very much.
I was asked to talk about the historical and theoretical backgrounds of secular ethics from the perspective of Western and Eastern civilizations. Now you can guess that's a research project for a lifetime, but we do it in 15 minutes. How do we do it? First I talk about East and West, then about what is secular, what does ethics mean in this context, and what in the end is secular ethics. East and West. Why East and West? We live in a globalized age. We talk about East and West today at the symposium, and we do not exclude by that North and South. Rather, we are talking about certain types of civilizations. And there's a purpose behind it. As Ulrich von Weizsäcker pointed out, we need a balance between East and West. And as Wolf Singer pointed out, isn't it strange that we have great science, great technologies for centuries, and almost no empirical evidence of how we are able to put ethical principles to work? We don't know who we are. So, the beginning with East and West, there is something wrong with this distinction. Usually it's said that philosophy, and with it ethics, go back to ancient Greece and the so-called pre-Socratics. Now, pre-Socratic philosophy is the philosophy before Socrates, who lived around 470 before the Common Era. We think that Western thought and civilization started there in Greece, A civilization which today includes so many different continents as Europe, the United States, but also in a way Latin America and Australia. So that's all Western. We think it all began in the 6th century before Christ in Greece, except there was Egypt before, the Babylonian Empire, Persia, India, and China. A closer look reveals that even in Greece, it all started at the borders. The pre-Socratic philosophers mainly came from the eastern and western fringes of the Greek world. And if you dig even deeper, you find that the famous philosopher Aristotle called these pre-Socratic guys the physiologi on one hand, which translates into the physical or natural philosophers. And that was a term coined in opposition to the theologi, that is, the God thinkers. With their means and methods, the physiologi, we would say the scientists today, were searching for natural explanations of the phenomena. The theologi, the theologians, based their knowledge of the world and ourselves about the supernatural, on gods, on magic. So, two things are important to remember from the very beginning. First, there is from early on a prequel to the later concept of secularism and secular ethics, that of natural explanation versus reference to gods. And the second point is also important. There is no strict separation of East and West at the beginning. These are just some Greek cities at ancient times. When you look at this list of names, you don't have to read them all. It's interesting that you see, for example, Nebuchadnezzar, the founder of Hindu religion, Jina Mahavira, lived at the same time. Lao Tzu, Buddha, and Confucius at the same time. A little bit later, Pythagoras, Parmenides, Zeno, so the famous Greeks, and then Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Historians call this the axial age, a concept introduced by the German philosopher Karl Jaspers, and he meant that almost simultaneously you had a strikingly parallel new development in Persia, India, China, and the Greek-Roman world. Why? Well, if you look at this map, there's one reason why. This is the kingdom of Alexander the Great, born in 356 before the Common Era. He died in 323 in Babylonia. As a youth, he was tutored by philosopher Aristotle until the age of 16, and basically after that he was on war continuously. And that's his realm. You can see that it's almost from Italy into India. That's one kingdom. Another point. You probably know that at the times of formation of Buddhism, there was no human or anthropocentric representation of the Buddha, but you find it after Alexander the Great. Images and statues of Buddha as a person emerged in the 1st century before our time in northern India, in Gandhara, which is basically the northwest frontier of Pakistan. You see the Greek and Persian influences immediately. You find Greek features such as wavy hair, drapery, shoes and sandals, leaf decorations, yes, and nirvana symbols. And that points to another direction. In the writings of the famous and probably most important early Buddhist philosopher Nagarjuna, who lived around 200 after Christ, after the Common Era, and founder of the Madhyamika school of Mahayana Buddhism, he discussed arguments of Aristotle, for example, in his text Fundamental Versions of the Middle Way. So we are all interdependent from very early on. That's another pacemaker, the Silk Road transmission. It was the analog version of today's internet. Parcels with goods traveled from Asia to Europe, not with Amazon, but on horsebacks and on donkeys. I mentioned the pre-Socratics. It was at this precise time that a very early secular development took place, called in literature the First or Greek Enlightenment, a criticism of the earlier theologies the myth and the stories of gods and God we find in Homer and Hesiod. Just an example. This is a quote from Xenophanes, who lived around 570 before the Common Era, born in a small town in Turkey. He did not believe in gods, but said that if there is any, then it should be one. He should be greatest among gods and humans. But he promoted a very modern relativistic idea, which became really famous more than 2,000 years later with philosopher Ludwig Feuerbach and his critique of Christianity in the Age of Enlightenment. Xenophanes wrote, "If cattle and horses and lions had hands, or could paint with their hands and create works such as men do, horses like horses and cattle like cattle, they also would depict the god shapes and make their bodies of such a sort as the form they themselves are. In other words, gods are like us. They are just projections of ourselves into something greater." So the roots of the Age of Enlightenment go back 2,500 years at least. And the roots are mixed. There are East and West. There's mathematics coming from India. And that's the start of secularization. There was a break, obviously, in the middle. Christianity, as a state religion, overtook the governmental structures and bureaucracy of the Roman Empire and banned part of the Greek philosophers. And it took years, centuries, for the Greek philosophers to be rediscovered. Now, what is secularization? A few points. First point is, secularization defines a process of separation. It is a separation between government and state institutions on the one hand, and religious institutions, persons and practices on the other. That started also in the Reformation times. Schools and universities were not exclusively religious intuitions anymore. This is St. Paul's Church on Oxford's Walton Street. Today is a bar and cafe. So this is the main difference between the Age of Enlightenment, Aufklärung, in the 18th and 19th century, and the early Greek Enlightenment. In the Greek cities, the separation of state and religion was not sharp. After the Age of Reason, there's a sharp distinction, and it's fixated in constitutional laws. You still have the right to be completely free of any religious rules and teachings, and the state in turn declares by law that it is neutral in these matters. The second aspect of secularization is less political. As Wolfsinger pointed out, this scientific education was only for a few intellectuals at the beginning. Now, does the rise of science mean that religion is necessarily dead? Religion did in fact withdraw, that's true, but it's still there today and it still has its niches and influence, as we all know. So the historical process of secularization is not just the history of science. It encompasses all cultural forces, from science to art, culture, value systems, furniture, fashion. In fact, religion and modernity can exist at the same time quite well. The only difference is that in democratic, secular societies, it's not accepted that religion is more important than human rights or laws. Charles Taylor, one of the leading experts, that's the third point, points out that there's another important aspect of secularization. It's not just science. Taylor calls what happens the spiritual supernova effect. Plurality exploded, so to speak. We now want to have many, many more options. Life in fullness. Starting with the Renaissance movement, followed by humanism, no authority except man's was accepted. Thinking, ethics, the conduct of life, knowledge, in all fields men replaced God, and the goal was not to go beyond human prosperity and flourishing. The consequence was an explosion of new ideas. God had to be driven out of the center of the universe, but soon we understood, with Darwinism, Freud, the age of machines, that there is no center, that we in fact are not even in the center ourselves. One of the great achievements of secularism in science is to see ourselves clearly and critically from outside of ourselves. In this photo we see ourselves in the Milky Way, even though we are part of the Milky Way. As Thomas Nagel puts it, we have the view from nowhere. But do we really understand what it means to be human? In neuroscience, we invent machines which enable us to study consciousness. That is what happens in our first-person perspective, in the individual, and we study it from the third-person perspective, that of a scientist performing tests. We use machines and apply very abstract methods in order to understand the mind. But do we really understand what is inside? Is it not true that to a certain extent we became blind to everything which cannot be explained by this cold, detached, third-person perspective? As a scientist, 15 years ago, you did better not say that you talked to His Holiness the Dalai Lama or that you practiced meditation. It was very bad for your career. Today, most scientists firmly believe that in order to understand and make better ethical decisions, we have to understand the brain. And now there's a rising consciousness that we have to understand the first-person perspective as well, and the second one, which is the interaction of humans. There's still another aspect of secularization. Singer mentioned it. Science is 100% man-made. So with the success of technologies and instruments, it became more and more difficult to resist the temptation that human beings themselves are just instruments and means to an end. So if you believe in the social powers of WhatsApp and Facebook today, you are means for a company running it. You are a digital worker who makes money for companies by using their products without getting paid. But that's only the economic surface. That the idea of men as instruments and means is far more dangerous. Think of the piles of teeth or glasses at the Auschwitz concentration camps. They show that humans can be degraded to suppliers of goods for other humans. The dental gold of killed Jews nicely filled the safes of banks. Modern technology also invented bombs and mass destruction. What you see here is one of the latest instruments, an autonomous military robot from Boston Dynamics. You can watch how it works on YouTube. It's scary. Being secular, therefore, is no absolute value in itself. Is secularity necessarily good? The dark side of secularization led to a vast killing of humans, of nature, of animals. But there is a growing tendency to escape from this purely physiological, natural world. And the favorite hipster way to escape is the use of digital media. Isn't it true that the world is just a matrix? Isn't it true that the world is just some sort of program? Can we alter it in our lives if we want? There's a very modern secular belief. In a way, it's the concept of Buddhist rebirth in its secular digital version. We just can reboot our lives. Karl Marx simply called this alienation and Fremdung. Secularization and even rationality can turn itself against us. Part of what science discovered is complexity. Now, complexity does not mean it's just very complicated. Complexity refers to a quality of dynamic, adaptive systems with many elements, and they're all interdependent and influence each other. Weather, for example, climate, financial systems, neurons in the brain. These systems are by nature not predictable. I can't go into that, but you can show that these complex systems will probably never be predictable. So, in order to cope with complexity, which we have to do if we want to act ethically today, we have to find new ways of teaching, education, and finally ways of growing in wisdom and compassion. Now, what is ethics? First of all, ethics is not morals. Why? Because ethics commonly is understood as the description or critical reflection or the theory of moral values and moral behavior. So you can act morally, but you're very bad in having a theory about it. So you can act morally without ethics in a way. Ethics means to examine arguments and justifications. So ethics consists in the rational construction, in the critical examination of values, arguments, and rules. The hope is that ethics helps to solve moral problems. There are two major principles at work in ethics. One is called deontological ethics. That's Greek and just means that what has to be done, a highest value. And you never discuss this value. Don't lie and never do anything else. But is lying always good? So there is a second principle, it's called the teleological principle, which means you have to achieve a goal. So whether or not you reach this goal, you can empirically test. You don't need thinking, you just look at what you did and look at reality. Today, that's usually called consequentialism. The consequences are the ultimate basis for judgment about rightness or wrongness of what you do. I think today in our Western civilizations, what we have done is we basically have a so-called deontological nucleus. That is, we have basic rights which we do not discuss anymore, human rights, that's the framework. And in our everyday life, as practical guidelines, we are very pragmatic consequentialists. So we mix the two. As His Holiness pointed out yesterday, we are social beings. From the very beginning, we can cooperate, have empathy, and be compassionate, yet there's always another side, as Wolf pointed out. There is a tremendous agreement in the basic orchestration of life. For example, it's better to do good than bad. It's not good to kill the guy next door unless you are at war. Then it's okay, even desirable. It's not a great idea to steal from your neighbor unless he's an enemy. It's not smart to have sex with your neighbor's wife, but rape in war is quite okay, even though it's banned by international laws. So actions can be bad and good at the same time. That what is bad within the in-group, that is for your friends, your ethnic group, your team, is quite often permitted or even demanded when you deal with the out-group, the others, the enemies, the bad, the evil, the Chinese, the Tibetans, the women, the men. Which leads me to a last remark on ethics. Marcel Reich-Ranitzky, the famous German literary critic who escaped the killing in the Warsaw Ghetto in Auschwitz, told me several times, you can read and recite Goethe and like Mozart's piano sonatas and operas, but all this love for art did not prevent Nazis with a very high education to stand at the ramp in Auschwitz and kill their neighbors who happened to be Jews. So there seems to be no way to prevent us once and for all from doing that. There is no automatic direct line from rational understanding to be good to actual doing. There is one explanation. Our problem is that our brain is branded in a very simple distinctions between in-groups and out-groups, and that's an animal heritage. Even Jane Goodall, the famous British primatologist, used to start when she talked about apes, which she liked very much, with a short introduction saying that chimpanzees are very brutal, very cruel, and they are in fact mobbing each other. Recent research shows that members of one in-group which kill other chimpanzees from an out-group show not only aggression but a high level of oxytocin. That's a hormone we humans have as well, and it's used to build up social bonding. So killing can be connected at the same time with social bonding and nice feelings. Now the last part, and I'll make it short. What is secular ethics? Secular means there are no gods, or God, there are no magical powers, there's just this universe. All norms, all values, all rules and institutions are 100% man-made. It also means everything is ultimately interconnected and complex, and that there is an evolution of constant change of nature, culture, religion, and ethics. Now that's bad on the one hand. On the other hand, it gives us the possibility to continuously improve. The essentials of a secular ethics are, as Paul Singer pointed out already, rational discourse, empirical testing, and that's true for East and West. Then, democratic institutions, that's what the West has brought as a good result, plus motivation and secular spiritual training, that is what is coming from the East. And that all hopefully adds to a global secular East and West ethics. Thank you.
Wonderful.
So, Next speaker, Britta Hölze, psychologist. She did research as a neuroscientist with Sarah Lazar at the Massachusetts General Hospital and at Harvard Medical School. Her research focuses to uncover the neural mechanisms underlying the beneficial effects of meditation, yoga, mindfulness, both in clinical settings and in individual ones. She was trained as an MSBR teacher at the Center of Mindfulness at the University of Massachusetts, at the medical school. The center was founded by John Kabat-Zinn. She did research in Gießen at the university. And besides her research, she's teaching as a mindfulness trainer and is founder of the IM Institute, the Institute for Mindfulness. The A in German is for Achtsamkeit, and meditation in Munich. Britta Hölze.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I feel very honored that I have the opportunity to present to you, Your Holiness, today some of the findings that we have from the neuroscience research on mindfulness and to present that to you, the audience. When we talk of mindfulness, I mean what Wolf-Singer just spoke about as a practice for self-exploration as well as a practice for the cultivation of the mind. And in research context, we typically define mindfulness as the awareness that arises when we fully bring our attention into the present moment. So when we really become aware of what is happening right here, right now, and when we encounter that with a specific internal attitude that is characterized by acceptance, by curiosity, and by kindness. And I think, as you all know, mindfulness has made its way into a number of mindfulness-based programs over the past 20, 30 years. And there is increasing research activity going on with these mindfulness-based programs. Here's a graph that shows the number of publications per year. And as you can see here, it really only began about 10 years ago or so that the number of studies began to increase, but it has increased exponentially since then. So it is a very active research field right now, but it's also very young at the same time. And I want to just emphasize that we're only at the beginning of understanding from a scientific perspective what mindfulness practice can do to psychological aspects and to the brain. The next slide shows some of the research findings that we have that document the beneficial effects that mindfulness practice can have on individuals. First of all, to name that we know it can really reliably reduce stress. And along with that, we see changes in the physiology that are related to this reduced stress, such as improvements in coronal heart diseases or improved immune function. Here's a study from the lab of Richard Davidson, who I know is a good friend of yours. We also know from the field of mental health that mindfulness is beneficial for reducing depressive episodes. In depressed patients, it can reduce anxiety symptoms, and it's also effective in pain management. These are the three best validated findings that we have in the field of mental health. In healthy individuals, we frequently see an increased well-being and life satisfaction. We have more recently turned to the effects on compassion, and we'll hear a lot more about that today. So we do see in studies increased compassion with even relatively short forms of training. We know about improved communication skills, and we even have some findings of enhanced creativity following some forms of mindfulness practice. So with this wealth of beneficial findings, we also have to say that some findings are still contradictory, and there are a lot of open questions, so we definitely need a lot more research to be done there. But we also see very promising effects, preliminary promising effects. So the question that arises is the question, how does it actually work? What are the mechanisms that underlie mindfulness practice to exert the beneficial effects? And my colleagues and I have tried to sort of translate that into terminology of Western psychology and have suggested this framework where we suggest, or the field, I would say, suggests that mindfulness works in part by enhancing attention regulation skills. It improves emotion regulation, and it has an impact on self-awareness. And we could summarize these three components under the term of self-regulation. That is, it has an impact on the way we regulate ourselves, our internal reactions, and our behavior. And I want to now briefly talk about these three subjects, so to say, and I also want to get a little bit into the neuroplasticity research. We know and have seen over the last year how plastic the brain is and how changes can be supported through practice. Many of my colleagues and I use magnetic resonance imaging, Kernspintomography, to look into the brain and see the changes here. So attention regulation, I think most of us will agree that it is an area that becomes increasingly important in the time of constant stimulus overload that we are faced in our societies. That is not only the case in school settings, but virtually in every dimension of our lives. We're really faced with an enormous stimulus overload. So we have to deal with that, and we want to keep the ability to really focus and on that what is relevant and what we feel is worth pursuing in this moment. We really want to be able to keep our focus on what we believe is worthwhile focusing on. And meditation practice is really, in the first step, also includes attention training, to train the ability to really stay with what is aimed at. And research shows that attention capacities are indeed improved through meditation practice. A number of studies using psychological tests have demonstrated that. One of the components of attention that gets trained relatively early on in the practice is called the executive attention, and that is the ability to disregard distractions. So the ability to focus on the goal that we have set and disregard whatever distracts that focus. So we have begun to look into the brain and see what happens in the brain as people improve their executive attention. We know one brain region that supports executive attention is called the anterior cingulate cortex. So we have wondered, would that be enhanced through mindfulness practice? And through a number of studies at this point, we know at this point, yes, it does get strengthened by meditation training. Here's just one example of a study that I did in Gießen, quite close to Frankfurt here, where we saw that experienced meditators have greater brain activity in that area. But we have a number of findings here from various labs, and the conclusion in current meta-analyses is that, yes, we do believe at this point in time that attention regulation and the anterior cingulate cortex function is strengthened through mindfulness practice. Okay, so this is an obvious relevant area to all of us when we need to focus in busy work settings or we want to keep a thread of a conversation. That's where that becomes relevant. The second topic that I want to talk about is emotion regulation. And what does it mean when we talk about mindful emotion regulation? A first aspect of that, and the important first aspect, is this sort of a self-exploration, this aspect of really becoming aware of what it is that I'm actually feeling in the moment, which is not trivial at all in our societies. We're typically not taught to really turn towards ourselves and notice our emotions. So that would be the first step. And then to learn to encounter our emotions with curiosity, with openness, and with acceptance. So really fully embracing it, being there with it with kindness, rather than having that feeling that I should rather suppress my emotions or it's not okay what I'm feeling. So really getting into a different contact with it. And I would say that's, from my understanding, it's probably what the Buddha meant when he was talking about reducing resistance or attachments that cause suffering. So as a way to reduce the suffering. When we talk of the brain, I want to give you this very rough picture here. We know that some brain regions are involved in emotion regulation. First of all, the amygdala, part of the limbic system, gets activated when we experience emotions such as fear. It fires to help us get out of that dangerous situation. The other brain region that then comes in to help us regulate is the prefrontal cortex, part of the more higher developed areas of the brain. And that prefrontal cortex has the ability to regulate the activity of the amygdala. So what is important for successful, we could say, emotion regulation is that the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala work together well. So we have looked at that to explore whether mindfulness training in anxiety patients, in this case, in this study, whether mindfulness can produce a change in those related networks after 8 weeks of training. And what we see here, so those were anxiety patients going through a mindfulness-based stress reduction program for 8 weeks. What we see in the brain is that there is indeed a change that we see in the magnetic resonance imaging pictures, a change in the connectivity, or we could say in the way these brain areas communicate with one another. So they work together more closely. And interestingly, this pattern of changed activation in the brain that we see here is not what we typically see when people down-regulate their anxiety or so. When they suppress feelings, we would expect a different pattern. This is not what we see here. What we see is a pattern that we interpret to be more representative of something like more like a monitoring or an awareness, where we're aware of the emotions but accepting them and not suppressing. And interestingly, this goes along with reduced anxiety symptoms. So it does have a clear relevance for well-being and can help patients suffering from anxiety. to come to the third point, the self-awareness, and that I would understand as having two aspects. And the first aspect is a body awareness, or enhanced awareness of emotions, turning to ourselves, interoceptive awareness. And we know from, there's not a lot of literature there, but this is a study from Tanya Singer, for example, showing that we see with training enhanced body and interoceptive awareness. And we also see that there is a brain region involved, the insula, that represents interoceptive awareness, and that is typically modified with mindfulness practice. And we see it is involved. So that's one of the aspects. The other, and this is where we come to also what we touched on yesterday in your presentation, Your Holiness, the relationship that we have with the self. And that is a very important and a very strong effect of how that could make a difference in our world, I believe. First of all, we frequently see more self-esteem, so people are feeling more friendly with themselves, more self-compassion with mindfulness practice. But then we also see less of an identification with that static sense of I. So less of that attachment or holding on to this I with the mindfulness practice. And rather people focus on a larger whole, on a connectedness with a larger whole. We also see there's not a lot of literature on the neuroscience aspect of this, but some studies point in that direction, that we see altered activity in brain regions that are related with self-relevant processing. So it seems like practitioners are doing less of this egoistic mental activity of a narrative self, so to say. And I think we can imagine, or it becomes clear here, that this is a good basis for the experience of more connectedness and a basis for compassion and relationship to relate with others, and also a willingness to help. And we will hear more about this in the other presentations today. I just want to mention, because she's not here with us today, Tanya Singer's study. I know, Your Holiness, you're very familiar with that. I just want to say it for the audience, because she's not here today. She has a great project going on at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, looking at a one-year practice and see how that can have an impact on social relationships and on compassion. So you can look this up for yourself. And just to conclude, so we have a lot of promising findings here. We have some suggested mechanisms of how mindfulness practice can work, and it becomes obvious that those are relevant not only for health and well-being, but certainly for school settings, for the way we interact at work, for example, and for society at large. We're only just beginning to understand the neuroscience components of this. And I want to end this talk with thanking, first of all, the Mind and Life Institute for supporting a lot of our work, and then you and the audience for your attention. Thank you.
I give it to you. Our next speaker is Geshe Lobsang Lehi. He holds a degree from Deprom Gosling Monastery in South India, completed his PhD at Emory University in the United States, and he's Executive Director of the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics at Emory University, where he's professor. He's also co-founder of the Emory-Tibet Partnership, and in his work he focuses on traditional Buddhist and contemporary Western approaches to emotions and their impact on wellness. And in his presentation he will present you the framework for compassion-based ethics at Emory University's education program, which he was asked to develop at the request of His Holiness, the Sea Learning Program.
Your Holiness, it is always such an honor to present on some of the work that Your Holiness so deeply values, such as the secular ethics in education. Emory University, we are very honored that Your Holiness has entrusted us to carry on this work by establishing the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics. Our President Claire Sturck, and the community at Emory sent their regards to Your Holiness. My presentation today will focus on the framework for secular ethics in education, what we refer to as social, emotional, and ethical learning. The World Happiness Report. It is a report produced at the Commission of United Nations. In 2015 report, they had a chapter that calls for promoting secular ethics, and the authors there, who are economists and educationist scientists, they present the need for a different way of measuring our progress. So far, we have focused on progress on the material terms, but they see that progress must be measured on the degree that people experience happiness or the satisfaction in life. And they propose the old model of ethics itself, sort of the top-down approach to ethics, may not be relevant for today's multicultural society. They very much see Your Holiness's vision for secular ethics that actually values the religious, the basic values that all religions emphasize, but also the values that those without religion also see very important for our well-being. So they quote Your Holiness from Beyond Religion, where they said that for all its benefits in offering moral guidance in life, religion is no longer adequate as a basis for ethics. Many people no longer follow any religion. In addition, in today's secular and multicultural societies, any religion-based answer to the problem of our neglect of inner values could not be universal, and so would be inadequate. We need an approach to ethics that can be equally acceptable to those with religious faith and those without. We need a secular ethics. This year, they produced another report on happiness, in which they see what are the determinants for happiness, what constitutes happiness, looking at the adult population. And if Your Holiness can see from the right, the adult satisfaction in life, of course it depends on many factors. There is economic factor that includes income, education, employment, but also social factors like the crime, the family life, the partnering, and the health, physical as well as mental. All of these are important for flourishing or the well-being in the adult life by under the term satisfaction, life satisfaction. But as they trace back what constitutes or what predicts in the child's development for the most important factor for happiness, they find that mental health is actually the strongest predictor for the well-being, more so than education and the income. But in childhood, what predicts happiness in the adulthood is not education. Education is a worse predictor for adult happiness and well-being. Actually, the behavior of the child and emotional state of the child. These two seem to be the strongest predictor. And what conditions of the environment help children develop emotional balance or the emotional health and better behaviors? They find not the family income, not even the parenting, but it is the mental health of parents, particularly of the mother and the student. The school environment seems to be very, very important. So, in brief, they conclude mental health is very important predictor for our well-being. But adult mental health is very much predicted by childhood emotional health and behavior. That in turn is informed by parents. The parents' mental health, particularly of the mother and the school ambience of the school environment, both primary and the secondary schools. So therefore, that they see that the education is very, very important, and the policymakers, both at government and NGOs, must focus on how to help students develop these skills. The mental health, if it is such a strong predictor for our well-being in adults, we see today our children, particularly in the adolescents, age 12 to 17. This Time magazine in 2015 had an article that presented how widespread the mental health is today, particularly in the United States. If you could see depression, for example, 3 million teens aged 12 to 17 had at least one episode of major depression. 30% of girls and 20% of boys in this age group have an anxiety disorder. Hopelessness, which is a major predictor for depression. 30% of adolescents in this age regularly have the feelings of sadness and the depression. So, what it shows is that in education today, we do need an education that informs these skills. So therefore, at Emory University, Your Holiness, based on your writings, the Ethics for the New Millennium and the Beyond Religion, we have developed a framework for secular ethics in education that draws from these your writings, and then it provides a structure based on Daniel Goleman and Peter Senge's book called Triple Focus, and it is a new approach to education. They have written this for the education, the schools. What it shows is that there is a need for what they call soft skills, or the non-cognitive skills, sometimes they call, like such as compassion, self-awareness, our ability to regulate emotions and so forth. There is, of course, a big movement in the West today called social emotional learning. This is a very big movement for the last 20, 30 years. A meta-study recently found that in schools where they have social emotional learning curriculum, actually the students there show 10% strong, better pro-social behavior, 10% less antisocial behaviors, and even the academic achievement, they have 11% higher academic achievement. So the social, emotional, and ethical learning, our framework that we have developed based on Your Holiness's vision and the writings, and complemented, of course, by the emerging scientific findings in evolutionary biology, neuroscience, and cognitive sciences. It basically presents the Daniel Goleman's model where he presents triple focus, like inner focus, other focus, and outer focus. Basically, it has to do with inner focus about being aware of our own feelings and emotions and our inner life. Other focus about others as being social beings, our ability to relate to others' needs and feelings and emotions, and outer focus to understand the context in which the various events unfold, from small to the large issues. So there are three kind of domains: personal, social, and systems. These skills are, for these three focuses, or the three skill sets, we can develop by awareness, compassion, and awareness and compassion, when they come together, can inform our behavior or the action. That is further kind of divided into 9 components. For example, the personal domain part, their awareness relates to our, in terms of the personal domain, our awareness of our own emotions and thoughts and feelings. That, when it is understood in the context, can help us relate to our own ups and downs and so forth, so self-compassion. And then those can be developed through certain sets of practices for self-regulation, which is important. And the setting in the social domain, our interpersonal awareness is important. That can lead to compassion and empathy, the deeper empathy for others, and through that we can learn how we can relate to others, interact with others through relationship skills and so forth. And on the systemic level, on the larger level, interdependence is the concept that the awareness of our interdependence, appreciating that reality, that can also lead to understanding on the global level how all of us, all living beings, have the same basic needs and so forth. That was, as Your Holiness emphasized about the importance of this understanding of the oneness of the 7 billion humans today. And it's that kind of perspective that it can lead to the actions or the engagement on the communal level or the global levels. But as this work is very much based on understanding emotional life, so therefore the map of emotions or the mind is the kind of central emotional literacy, if you will, to have that emotional hygiene. And so we draw from the work of Your Holiness's friend, Paul Ekman, the expert in emotion, and to inform our curriculum based on scientific understandings about emotion, how we understand emotion, its context, and how we can see in the different degrees of emotion in the same family, but also kind of triggers, what kind of triggers trigger those emotions. This is very much drawn from the evolutionary kind of the perspective, from the evolutionary biology and the sciences. But our work also emphasizes very much on the map of emotions that are found in the contemplative traditions, like the Indo-Tibetan literature on mind and emotions. As there are various models, that Abhisamuchya is one of the texts where it even classifies the mind in primary mind and the mental factor of the secondary mind. When it comes to the secondary or the mind or the mental factor, there are like 51 different kinds. For example, 5 of them universals and so forth. So these are different categories. Of course, and understanding about this kind of map of mind at age-appropriate level, perhaps not at the very the young elementary school level, but maybe high school and the college level, can highly enhance our understanding of the emotions and thereby regulating and cultivating those mental states that may be healthy. Another way of looking at this is from the Pramana literature in the Indo-Tibetan Buddhist kind of tradition or the psychology, and that it has to do with it's a cognitive model. How do we understand our mental state? How do we relate to the world out there? That there could be a mistaken perception, but how we correct that? And then this process, like the 6 steps there, it can be understood from something that is mistaken, can be turned into a certain doubt, to correct assumptions, to then using logic and reasoning, a critical thinking process, to inform an inferential understanding that can be further kind of deepened and eventually into the direct understanding and so forth. So the C learning, the social, emotional, and ethical learning itself, it follows the teaching strategy of the three kind of step learning process, and that of course school environment is very important to create a compassionate classroom, but then the knowledge itself is not simply to have the content knowledge, that's only received knowledge or the but what is important is then to help students to come up with their own understanding through critical thinking and use of reasoning and the various other activities and so forth. But then eventually, if in this model, the ethics is not so much about telling what should and what should not be done, but rather informing certain habits, certain dispositions. When you have developed those dispositions, then and become embodied, then you would act appropriately. So embodied knowledge is important. That leads to this spontaneous engagement part. Of course, in this curriculum, we follow 4 threads. So scientific perspective is very important, informed by scientific evidence, as Your Holiness see, beside common sense and common experience, scientific evidence as the basis for informing this form of knowledge. Critical thinking to arrive at the personal kind of knowledge, critical thinking is important, but to take that to a deeper level, reflective practices like the contemplative practices, meditations, and so forth. And then also, of course, the cooperative learning or the engaged learning, where the students can work together and through writing and poetry and music, but also service learning and so forth. And Your Holiness, what we have been so far able to achieve is we have finalized the framework that can easily be adapted to various cultures and to suit their local needs and so forth. The framework is complete. Learning experience, curriculum itself for the elementary and the middle and high school level, initial versions of the curriculum is also developed, but we are at the phase of refining those. And what we have done so far is this year in July and August we offer teachers training, because the training the teachers is very important. If the teachers are not aware of this knowledge themselves, and particularly if they themselves are not equipped with these inner skills, it would be very hard to embody and to impart that knowledge. So therefore we see the teacher preparation workshops very important. We offer 4 of them, 3 in the United States, beginning in Atlanta, but then also Peoria, that's near Chicago, and in Colorado, another in Colorado, and then one in India. And these are the teachers who went through this training. There was 62 or so in Atlanta area, 30 some in India, about 30 in Peoria, and the 20 some in Colorado areas. And then at this point, what we are doing is providing them small sections of those lessons to those trained teachers, and then they are bringing that into the classroom, and then we will collect their feedback to further update and refine the curriculum. And then our goal is to complete that by next summer, so that we can have more formal scientific kind of the pilot studies in schools starting fall next year. I just want to conclude this with the aspiration that Your Holiness has expressed in your writings and beyond religion. This initiative is certainly very ambitious. Our goals are really ambitious. If it is helpful to bring it to a global level, of course, but it will take time, and we are very deeply kind of encouraged by the vision Your Holiness has for this, as you mentioned. My hope and wish is that one day formal education will pay attention to what I call education of the heart. Just as we take for granted the need to acquire proficiency in the basic academic subjects, I'm hopeful that a time will come when we can take it for granted that children will learn as part of their school curriculum the indispensability of inner values such as love, compassion, justice, and forgiveness. And Your Holiness, with your guidance and the guidance of many of our advisors that deeply are convinced, who are deeply convinced the vision that you provide for the education with very encouraging and deeply committed to making this initiative as successful as it can be, and we request your continued guidance for this endeavor. Thank you.
Yeah, after all these different inputs, we would be happy if you could comment on them. To put it as a wide question.
Of course, indeed, I really admire. It's the experienced, it's the people, their presentation, wonderful. Your presentation, including history, so that presentation created more confusion in my mind. But grateful. I think it is quite natural. If we investigate more sort of the 10 or social something, 10 then the reality, nothing exists by objectively, according to quantum physics. And Buddhist philosophy also did say that. So, too much detail, then you can't find what's the reality. Everything is due to other factor, it works. But itself, nothing exists by independently, like that. So it's a scholar, investigate deeper, then very difficult to identify it like that. So in any way, I really appreciate. Now more and more people in America, including some universities, some institutions, and in India as well, some institutions now seriously looking in this field. Education about external thing, very highly developed solution. But that also is a further development. And then the thought is at the mental level, the modern education not adequate. So we should possibly add something about that to research, analyze. And I think common people, it's more acceptable, the scientific finding. So that's why last over 30 years, I have serious discussion with scientists on value of father. So I believe ethics must be based on our common sense, common experience, and then scientific finding. So, what's the meaning of secular and khasa? Religion or secular? Doesn't matter. See, what is your definition? Ethics.
the science of the rules of conduct. And secular ethics would be an empirically based ethics, based on insight.
I feel ethics is basically including animal, insect, everyone wants happiness. So any action brings some happiness, comfortable. That's an ethical action. That depends on our motivation. So any mental action, verbal action, physical action, which brings some benefit to other, some happiness to other, that's an ethic. Any sort of mental action, verbal action, physical action creates more pain to other. That's unethical. So, and all religious tradition, I usually describe existing world religion is human religion. So, all religion carry the message of love. And for that, different religion utilize different reasons, different methods. But the basic goal is same. Now today, out of 7 billion human beings, 1 billion non-believer and 6 billion supposed believer, but a lot of mischievous want to believe. So this clearly shows lack of conviction about the real teaching of religion. Religion just slowish way, some prayer, some rituals. But that, I think, sometimes that's harmful to create my religion, their religion. If we stress the real essence of religion, love, forgiveness, tolerance, then you see it is impossible for all different religious tradition, you see, create more because of the division and the fighting and finally killing. So therefore, now in order to have believer more sincere believer and a non-believer or compassionate human being, both now we really need proper education, systematic way to educate. Warm-heartedness, compassion is key factor. Firstly, more happiness for an individual, and eventually better health, and in the family, in the community, and finally self-building. So, that's all. I don't know. So, I really appreciate all people who really are carrying some sort of research work or making clear presentation about this language. So, thank you. What's now next, Greta?
We have time, right? We have. Yeah.
No question answer, yes.
Yes.
You have to leave. Yes. Instead of helping, quite sure we will see few times in future. Sit down. Sameno. I think you should keep. Historically, Mongolian and we Tibetan, I think, almost like twin brother, sister. And I think we both have the kasa. One mark here, kasa. Both kasa. Both mark. And I was told Hungarian also have that. I don't know. So thank you. I think Buddhism reached, I think Mongolia and Tibet. Then we become more, I see, right, becoming more peaceful, non-violent. Before Buddhism reached, we are quite warrior. We carry sword and spear whenever we face some resistance. Thank you. Oh, Vietnamese also. Okay. Thank you. Now thank you. Now, our business. Now come. This is it.
So, even if philosophy is confusing sometimes, Ulrich von Weizsäcker, Wolf Singer, they both pointed out that science or secularization in themselves are very ambivalent. They can be used for good and they can be used for bad. The same is true for techniques like mindfulness-based stress reduction. They can be used to help people, but they also can be used to turn people into more productive machines in an enterprise. So how do you think could we cope with that?
I have one question to you. I think till later part of 20th century, scientist and especially brain specialist. You see, only brain, mind is because of the production or product of brain. Later part of 20th century, some scientists begin to feel whatever you call mind or some other word, but there is something which affects our brain. So now, beginning of this 21st century, this is some, I think, more research work there. So what is your opinion?
Well, I think you're right in saying that we believe that the mind is an emergent property of the mechanics of the brain. Without working of the brain, no mind, no cognition, no mental phenomena. But what we have probably underestimated, we neuroscientists, is that there is a reciprocal interaction between all our minds, because we as persons interact with each other. We create a cultural world, which is a spiritual world, a mental world, an immaterial world, that acts back on our minds, on our brains. And this is perhaps what people think is this top-down causation, the effect of mental constructs on brain functions and behavior. So it all started, of course, with matter and with neuronal processes.
Yes.
But we have this feedback loop through culture, through society, through concepts, through beliefs, which are very, very important in motivating our behavior. So this is how I think nowadays, but it may be different tomorrow.
True, that's right. As a result of, let's say, the more closer relation or discussion with scientists, I really found the scientists, they are very unbiased. Investigate, a little bit of the skepticism, not accept easily, through investigation. So they are not because of the biases always, very neutral. Sometimes a religious person, sometimes a little bit of the biased. And I feel some, I have appreciation. Now, what's the definition of brain?
What's the definition of brain?
Brain.
Well, it's this organ made up of 10 to 11 neurons, connections, and all the nervous system that goes with it.
Then is a child, after the conception, after 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, are there any sort of feeling or not?
Very early on, probably not. You need a certain minimum of substrate, of nerve cells, of interactions.
So can you say brain just as a conception, no brain, but there was the seed of brain there, but first month, second month, third month, and gradually brain, you see, because of the development.
Yeah.
And some small insect, like mosquito. Any brain?
Oh yeah. Because probably also has some rudimentary feelings, and it's a living being with it has value. We assign some ethical status to animals, of course. Different religions, different opinions.
I think insect, we cannot say it is ethical thing.
Well, they are objects of ethical consideration.
That is survival. Their own sort of life, their own sort of God.
Well, these ideas change over the centuries. I think we have become much more sensitive to all these issues than in the very beginning of our civilizations. We start to become aware of the interconnectedness of the whole living system.
And then the particle of these plants or rocks and our brain. Very, because of the subtle or finer sort of level, same. same particle, which because of the forming of brain, and particle which form in ground or rocks, I think, because of the subatomic way. I heard quark number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, like that. This smallest sort of particle. So on that level, no differences.
Maybe, and this is what Pampsicists say, that consciousness is everywhere. It's the primary source of everything. A neurobiologist could not confirm this. He would say there is inanimate matter that self-organizes into complex reproducible structures, which is living, is to reproduce yourself, and then become more and more complex. And I think you see it when the child grows up. The brain becomes more and more complex and it becomes developed. And you see how more and more functions become expressed, responsibility starts to increase.
And the brain especially, because of the teeth. So certain part of the brain, our human brain is bigger than elephant brain. The other part of the brain, of course, elephant brain is much, much bigger.
Yeah.
But the intelligence is, our brain is bigger, isn't it?
Connectivity is very different. The complexity of elephant brain is smaller than ours. It's just very big because elephant is big. It needs.
So now, my question is, basically, the ultimate sort of substance of this plant and our brain, I think it's the same.
The matter is the same,
Matter is
but the organization is different.
yeah, that's right. So what is the major factor? The particle, the combination, and then eventually some develop consciousness, some not develop consciousness. What's the major factor?
It's the complexity of the brain. Monkeys have very similar brains as we,
Yes.
but there are certain structures missing. They have no language, no really differentiated language, and we have it. Their ability to abstract is very limited. So they were not able to build culture. But we were able to build culture
Yes.
and then transmit our cultural knowledge to our offspring. So the spiral of cultural evolution started. And that made us very, very different from all the animal kingdom, which also brought us a lot of problems, unfortunately. But we are really, in this sense, very distinct from our nearest neighbors. Because we have belief systems, we have cathedrals, we have religions, and all those things which do not exist in the animal kingdom.
Then some occasion I asked a scientist, what's such conception, conception. Can you say the mothers would say womb normal, no defect, and then father's semen, mother's egg, perfect. So under that circumstances, the meeting take place, semen and the egg. Can you say 100% life start or not?
That's a very good and critical and unanswerable question. We discussed this a lot, also in the Vatican, because you know about all these ethical implications of stopping life during its development, abortion. And the question is life only starting when these two come together? In the Jewish belief system, they say the organism becomes only an ethical object or later during development in the womb. Some say that, the genes per se contain the program of life. The genetic content of the egg or of the semen contains the program, the blueprint of life. So this is already something that is to be preserved. Don't ask me.
My curiosity and also a little bit argument. Say in the past, some occasion I asked doctor if it is that because of meeting take place, 100% sure life start. Then they say no. Then we have to ask, what's third factor?
Yeah. Well, I have a partial answer. The semen already is a living organism. It swims,
Yes.
has sensors, it is a living being. So there's a good definition for life.
Each sperm have a mind.
I don't think so. But it's living.
But I think because of that one drop because of the semen, I think there are many several thousand sperms.
Very lively.
So among the sperm, one successfully enter in that egg, then conception take place. So some other cannot enter. What was the factor?
Well, so which makes the one win?
Oh yes.
Chance, to some extent, then the speed of swimming. Then they have sensors, they can find out where the leg is. So you can call this some innate intelligence, but they don't have a mind.
Thank you. Of course, frankly speaking, my question also will be sort of because of complicated question. Answer also not very clear. Thank you.
One of the things we heard is that obviously one major problem is complexity. Everyone mentioned complexity.
Complexity, yeah, right.
I would be interested in all of your opinion. How do you think we will be able to manage that? Because Wolfsinger said that there is no final goal of evolution. We just don't know what happens. And that's what a lot of scientists say. But we also know that we have to deal with complexity. Our finance system is complex, our brains are complex, even the interaction of education and the social system we live in is very complex because it's a lot of components influencing each other. How do you think we will be able to cope with this complexity?
The scientific sort of way to explain things through evolution. Human being through evolution. At the beginning, just sort of a different form of animal or something, like jellyfish. Then gradually, the circumstances and including climate, all these influenced and different form of body like that. Then also brain create develop like that. And depths are there. First I can see the sea animal, then gradually land. somewhere wing, gradually, some wing, gradually will change, and to hand. Not like that, these are evolution, isn't it? So some Buddhist texts say something different. That now has some challenge. Evolution. That's, I think, because of that, there is evidence there. One occasion in Australia, some television team came to see me and asked me, do you believe dinosaurs? I said, well, yes, of course. You can see there was a car, or bones, or these things. I was surprised. Later, some people told me, some Christians or a believer, that the world created by God 5,000 years, something like that. So, several millions years ago, you see, the world does not exist. So similarly, some Buddhist text is saying something different. In this case, we must accept the scientific finding. So that's why I describe myself half Buddhist monk, half scientist. So I believe the scientific finding, there is evidence. So we have to accept. We cannot argue.
There's still a problem. Because we know in the history of science, we have every now and then come to conclusions that turn out to be wrong. Even though we thought we had empirical evidence. So even scientific evidence is still a matter of, to some extent, a matter of belief. There are certain theories that cannot be proven by experiment because you cannot repeat the history, like evolution, for example. So what is considered true is the opinion of those who think they are experts if they agree. One should not overestimate the power of science. I think the worst thing that we are now experiencing in the moment is that we learn, and this is the question that Gerd asked, we now know for sure that systems that we have constructed, our social systems, that life itself depends on complex interactions that are, per definition, not predictable in their evolution. Not because we don't have enough knowledge, but because their dynamics are of a kind that cannot be analytically solved. This is the fallacy of nonlinear dynamics of complex systems. And so it's very tragic for us that we have to act, we have to design educational programs, we have to decide what we should do with our children, what we should do with our world, without, and at the same time knowing that we cannot know exactly what we should do. And therefore I think we need advice from your world, that through other methods of introspection and analysis of the reading of the minds and of the needs that we have as human beings, can give us advice on what we should emphasize. I mean, many things are trivial, we all want to become happy, but the question is, how do we do that?
For the program, I want to take some questions from audience. What do you think? Of course, the limitation of time there are, but I prefer just some questions. No question?
We have a microphone.
There's a microphone.
Yes. And we do it as yesterday, left and right, if you have answers. Sorry, questions. Well, maybe you have answers. And don't be shy.
Ich stelle es mal auf Deutsch. Ist es nicht so wie die letzten 2000 Jahre, dass wir immer wieder versuchen, uns alles über das Gehirn zu erklären und nicht eine Verbindung zum Herzen haben, weil wir sie nicht erklären können? Wenn wir einfach nur dem Herzen folgen würden, würden wir dann nicht einfach ankommen?
So the question, I try to translate. So the question is, aren't we focusing too much on the brain instead of the heart, because that's much more unsecure in terms of science? Don't we repeat the mistake that we have done centuries before? I hope that was correct.
I think heart controlled by brain. So we are now in this moment discussing about consciousness or these things. So mainly related to the brain. Then usually we use the word heart, heartedness, you see. But that's actually sort of sense of love or sense of concern of others' well-being. That's something. I think we use the word altruism. So we cannot explain where altruism comes. From heart, from brain. Right? Oh, yes, from brain. So that's true. That's true. So I don't know, generally, because the general usually we refer to heart, good heart, like that. But actually, heart, just a pumping, and provide blood to brain, and brain remain alive, so low blood circulation there. So heart, physically, is just a pumping, isn't it? So in any way, altruism, no matter we pinpoint what is the altruism, but we experience that as a child. Even in mother's womb, the mother's peace of mind, positive effect. Mother's anger too much stress, some effect to unborn child, isn't it? So therefore, the warm-heartedness or loving kindness is the key factor. As I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of problems which we have faced. Killing, and millions of poor people, and starvation, or lack of sense of control. They are well-being. Just think of me. My nation. So now we have to tackle this problem. By the way, this problem, not technology, but ultimately change here. Okay.
I think Britta wanted to say something.
Sure. I think you have some answer for
Can I?
ladies' question.
May
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
just say something
Yes.
to this? Because my understanding is that it's really a whole complete system. And by taking it apart into brain and heart and body, we're really not doing justice to the complex and complete system that we are. And I think from neuroscience perspective, we are also understanding that altruism, compassion, has a big component of turning into our own bodies. So turning into our own bodies, turning to our hearts, actually, and that of course is represented in the brain, but turning to our hearts and to our body might have an effect on even improving compassion, because we need to understand that how we feel, what it feels like to be in our own bodies, in order to then also feel into another body, another being. So I think this completeness and this feeling into our hearts, into our bodies, can actually improve altruism, but of course that is then represented in the brain, and change will also happen there. Yeah.
So there's a Tibetan saying which goes like, look at your own body and then try not to harm others.
Now I have one silly question. Silly or just funny. I just fact. Two scientists, one scientist here, one scientist here. Both knows is something special. So some connection your brain with nose. And then also, this is the great scientist, American scientist, Bridget Davison, also is a big nose. So I thought, the size of nose also some connection with your brain. Now, next question. Some question?
Yeah.
No question?
Yeah, hi.
Yes.
I guess in a lot of people's eyes it's a crazy question, but I guess you can handle with it. Do you believe in other species and on other planets which can maybe help us to develop our Earth?
Of course, we cannot see, we cannot prove, you see, because of that. But guess, so I think within this Milky Way, there is millions of stars, and each star there is some small planets here, and then limitless galaxies. We cannot say only this galaxy, this world exists, human being, difficult to say. So guess, or there may be different form of human being and different form of life. Yes, not that.
So you believe in it?
Yes?
Okay.
Oh.
And okay, that's all. Thank you.
If you accept, you see, there may be different form of life in different sort of star. Then better. If you say only this exists, only because of that, because of life exists on this planet, not much reason. Like that. That will. Now he says, organizer, he says, time for lunch. Thank you.
为什么说就没有地方的敏感，他管到这两个人不去，也就送人不去，生活的，我们看你们送这个去各地讲那么的，各地那边去学的，看你的公办系统，我是就没有地方的，他们搞到现在那个处理对不起的，公办系，我是的，但是这些的就是的。 지슈 유베 디 딱도 공부처기 딱 고된 소교训练们都 갈록 남도 젠남디 니은의 그지치学이 마음바인데 간주 다른 것이 까지 지주学设备 엔타과도 공부니 강의 이 공도 훈기 중지 투기 시대 훈기 중지 아니 강주 배우기 유라 연의 뉴도 지균하야기 저와다 너는 되다고 주진이
excuse me, God. Finally, at the end of this morning session, I would like, in the name of Tibet House Germany and in the name of our cultural foundation, say thank you so much, His Holiness. You are a great inspiration because of your strength, your vision, and your warm-heartedness. So we are deeply blessed and honored to be your host. And thank you also the speakers of this morning session. And we have as a gift for His Holiness, we have a katak and a pen from the brand Mont Blanc. It's not Kailash, it's a European Kailash, maybe. And this is a symbol for you that you should write and teach in the future many, many years. Thank you so much.
두지체. Thank you. 다시. When I greet my friend, you see, who have big nose, then I usually use a practice because of the Maori's tradition. That's here. So whenever I met a religious division, is those I always telling him, and his wife also. It's a big nose, so they are nose equipped to practice that touch. Thank you.
Nose okay?
Okay. You're well equipped now. Thank you, dear my friend. Many years. Yes, thank you. Touch. Thank you. He come from a very small village in Kuno. Eventually he joined one big monastic institution and study. So become good scholar. So originally monk. Now he disobeyed monkhood. So he enjoying more freedom now. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
hat er dann jetzt das Geschenk bekommen.